to Rizzoli Bookstore. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We're really delighted to have you all here to celebrate the release of Janet Delaney's beautiful new photo book, Red Eye to New York, which is published by MAC. Janet Delaney is a photographer and educator based in Berkeley. Her photographic work draws on research, close observation, and personal experience to represent how we live in cities. She's a 2020 Guggenheim Fellow and has received 3 National Endowment of the Arts grants. Previous books include Public Matters and South of Market. And tonight she'll be in conversation with Rebecca Bengal, a widely published writer of fiction, essays, and narrative nonfiction, who frequently writes about photography and collaborates with artists. Recent books include contributions to But Still It Turns, Justine Curlin, and Carolyn Drake. So after their conversation, it'll be about 45 minutes. We're going to have time for a Q&A with the audience, and then we'll have a signing, which we invite you to please stick around for. Books will be available for sale at the register at the front of the store, and you can also find me, and I can sell you a book. Thank you for supporting an independent bookstore in Manhattan by buying a book. And we just ask that you please keep your masks on during the talk. So anyway, thank you all again for coming, and please join me in welcoming Janet and Rebecca.
Is it on?
Okay.
Sounds
good.
Right. It doesn't sound.
Okay.
My hearing is distorted in the days of mass. So yeah. Well, it's really wonderful to be here, and I think Janet was just showing a few of the slides from Red Eye to New York. So hopefully that's set a little bit of the mood. But yeah, I think there's so much to talk about in this. But I think these photographs, I posted a few of them on my private Instagram the other day, and some people were just responding to them. It was kind of a test to sort of see what people respond to. Some of them obviously were already Janet Delaney fans, but some of them I think were new to the work, and I think some of them may have thought they were responding to these pictures, to this sense of something vanished in New York, but I think they're really about something else, something bigger than that people are responding to, and I don't know how they feel for you now in making this book, how you, what did you think that you were capturing then at the time, or looking for?
I think that welcome everybody. Thank you for having me. See that out there for sure. I appreciate what it takes to get anywhere. Now that I've been visiting for a few days and spent most of the time lost on the subway. But I think that when I was here in these photographs, made primarily in the 80s, I was not thinking about the future and how it was passing. I was mostly just entranced with how different this place was from what I was experiencing in San Francisco. I was also photographing at the same time in San Francisco. I was putting together the work that ultimately became Public Matters, using the same camera, and also working on another project that used a view camera. So I think back to that time that it was the freedom of just photographing a place that was so unique and inspiring, and I think they were small acts of love for the most part.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to talk about I've been thinking a lot about how you were making that work and traveling sort of, East Coast, West Coast, constantly back then. And I think, too, the story of how you made them and how you would travel here contributed so much to the way you made them and how they appear, how the light appears. And I think I would just love to hear you tell the story of those travels and how you came to take these sort of last moment flights from the West Coast, which I think is and just kind of to talk, you're photographing San Francisco at the time, it's the 80s, you're working in a photo lab, different time of life, different.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I have always had a love affair with New York, and I think for those of you who are immigrants to the city from any part of the world or the country have probably experienced that anticipation of coming in energy level that is so extremely high, at least at the beginning. And I think that any chance that I would have to come, I always said yes. And so a friend of mine from college had come as a painter to make his way, and he had his day job, as you do, and he was worked for DHL. And on occasion he would get these assignments to get somebody from San Francisco to quickly get on a plane so that probably some kind of legal documents that I never saw could be accompanying the plane, be on that midnight flight. And he just needed a person in the seat without a suitcase, which I could do. So, I was working in a lab, a photo lab, and it was the kind of job that you could just say, hey, I'm gone, I'll see you in a couple days or a week, and I would just say yes whenever he called. So I had a few trips like that. I had a few other kinds of trips. Basically, the pictures in the book are just, I think, from 3 trips, and about not that many rolls of film, really, like about 40 rolls of film. So at the time I was doing it, it was almost, just little moments. It's like, wow, check this out, check that out. It was definitely a sense of awe because I was never here very long. So whenever I saw something that caught my attention, I was like, oh, I need that, Yeah, there was a sense of just capturing it.
Well, there's also, the book is red eye to New York, so there's also that red eye, sort of raw, like sleep deprived, kind of charged. You're seeing your eyes are barely open, but they're wide open, and I feel like that contributed so much to the way that some of the photographs appear, because sometimes you were actually just getting out at really strange times and completely hitting the streets and photographing right away, if I'm correct.
Well, I do know, and now that we have cell phones, so we're all photographers. Am I doing this right? So it sounds a little feedbacky. But when I have the camera in my hand, then I make pictures. It is a kind of a closed loop. If I'm going to bother carrying it, I'm going to use it. So I always keep it with me. It's an old adage among photographers. I frankly don't do this at home. But when I'm on, in a place that moves me like New York does, I would just be there and land and just start photographing. I had a dear friend who lived on Water Street down by the Fulton Fish Market when it was that and not the seaport. And so I would just make my way over to her place and make 5 flights up, which for a Californian is a big deal. No elevators. And I would, land in her loft that she lived in, and then I would just venture out from there and kind of daily walks. Just anytime I wanted to see anything, I would just also be photographing, which I think people do now. I'm sure everybody. The act of seeing is it's a kind of a meditation of sorts. And when I'm using the camera, I'm sort of stopping and looking in a way that allows a kind of a stillness and a kind of an emotional and a wordless connection to the things that I'm framing with the camera. And I think that's, when I didn't have a time frame, I didn't have to be someplace, that I could get into that meditative state.
Yeah, I definitely get that sense in the pictures, and there's a kind of stillness that seems to exist that is either a quality of being on certain emptier streets or being on the streets at this very rare time, maybe really, really early time of morning or late time, that kind of those in between times after you had just landed and were sort of following. You let yourself kind of go by chance, right? Because there was no.
Totally.
Yeah. Did you have like a real map of New York in your head? Or was
I wish. I think I was just remembering that I hardly ever took the subway because I found it so confusing. And frankly, I didn't want to spend the money. And it wasn't very much. I was just looking at the prices of subways. And so I just walked everywhere, which sort of allowed me an ability to take in more content and situate myself. So it was definitely a walking meditation with the photographs and the camera.
And then coming back to like going sort of back and forth between the West Coast and New York, like what were some of the immediate differences that you would like? Did the light, like as a photographer, how did the light feel, and did you sort of adjust automatically? Like how did the light feel to you in the cities at those times? It's such a while ago.
Light's kind of the same.
Yeah.
I would say that there is a unique California light, and I thought about that a lot in the sense that, particularly in the summer, we don't have humidity. We have fog, true, but you don't have that sort of moisture in the air, and you don't have that kind of flat lighting that you sometimes have, which is kind of a gift and can be kind of turn off the signals. I know sometimes when I would see light, I would probably make a photograph because of the light, and you just sort of, dare I say, be drawn to the light. And so that was probably an element for me. And yeah, I would say light is obviously, it's the underpinning of all good images in one way or the other, and flat light can serve you well as anything more dramatic. So
I guess I meant the more of it is blocked off now because so much is more developed.
True.
That was the
yeah. No, architecturally,
yeah,
we
yeah.
have closed in the space. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah.
And yes, didn't catch that.
No. It was a subtle. But and too, like you were at the time. I mean, your work is so much about finding these kind of intimate relationships in public spaces within cities, and you were photographing at home in a very different way in your neighborhoods. And maybe talk about the kind of that kind of relationship that you were building there versus these, like what you said, acts of love, but like they were fleeting. I mean, you moved on. They weren't sustained, but I think that intimate relationship is definitely still there in these pictures.
So the work I was doing in San Francisco while I was working in these images, in particular the work South of Market, I was doing kind of an in-depth document about a particular neighborhood, which we now call Soma Now, also known as the tech center of the universe. And the idea of that project in the 1980s was to sort of give a voice to the people who were being overshadowed by the arrival of the new convention center. And a large area had been demolished for reconstruction, and redevelopment had come in, and so there was this kind of significant political element to that work. It was very organized and quite pointed in my efforts, and I photographed my neighbors, and I did interviews, so it was a document of a different sort. When I came to New York, I was liberated from those obligations. There are other people that are going to do that, who live here and have the depth and the commitment to that kind of a record keeping. But in San Francisco, I just don't think I could find the kinds of crowds that I could easily encounter here. People weren't living their life in public in the same way. We were in cars more. And, there were people, you just couldn't find a good crowd. And being a street photographer, a good crowd is sort of a really important thing, because people kind of don't observe you taking observations of them in a way. And I think there was more of we're all in it together, we're just in the public and we're moving around and oh, hi, you took my picture, fine, and going on. I mean, I never had anybody sort of respond negatively. It was sort of like a kind of a generous exchange, if anything. And oftentimes people would notice after the fact, and maybe I would chat them up or whatever, and then keep going, because there was a kind of a flow that was happening. That I teach photography. I did teach photography for many years, and I would want them to have that experience of photographing strangers, because it's a really specific part of photography. And I couldn't really find any place in San Francisco which would have the density that you could sort of do this, except maybe North Beach. So I'd crowd them all in, and they'd almost out and under the people on the street, and we'd go around and try to be surreptitious very hard. And just to sense what it was like to have that kind of, it's an improvisation of the eye where you're composing the entire frame, and you're situating a specific moment that would have a charge to it of people doing something inside the frame, as opposed to just standing and posing in the context of that space that you created. So I think that developing that kind of skill set to be able to create the whole photograph, the whole story is, maybe it's like jazz in a way, and you don't know for sure. You just kind of go in there, and you have some rules perhaps that you've integrated enough so that you can apply into the dance movement of visual scene.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, definitely improvisation. I mean, like, I think that's so much, as I was saying before, chance, improvisation, but also that sense of just being free and stepping off the plane. They are very liberated pictures in that way of just, and I think that maybe is something that people are responding to, and that I'm responding to too. I didn't come to New York until much later, but these are the kinds of scenes that I feel like I imagine being here, like even just these sort of small characters that you've found we do have this very fleeting but very like lasting and resonant and intimate connection with them. Even just, the guy eating his breakfast, or he seems like such a New York character, but it is in the way that you're, when you step off of a plane, or you've like crowded in a car with a bunch of your friends and you get dumped off in New York, and you just are seeing the city in this very alive way. I feel like these photographs allow you to kind of re-see the city in that sense, maybe. And there's groups of people. There are some crowds that you stumbled upon. I feel like but a lot of like really wonderful individuals in these, and also just moments of just pure light, of just like buildings with light, and just nice.
Well, I think when I started talking about this project originally, just trying to kind of create the framework for the narrative that would be the book, I kept thinking, I'm photographing all these crowds, and it's a crowded place, and it's New York, and then I started looking at the photographs, and I realized, while I had some photographs that worked as crowds, primarily I had individuals and isolated and kind of lonely in the city, and I probably, two reasons. The more enticing might be that I was also alone, and I was sort of keying in on these individual people that had that kind of moment, and also it's probably easier to make a good picture like that. It's very difficult to organize a crowd successfully into a frame and have something happening. And Melissa O'Shaughnessy does a great job of it in Perfect Strangers. I mean, she can take a gazillion people and just get them all to look like she has choreographed it. And she has an amazing eye that way. But I think with the Rolly, it's much slower. No autofocus, and the meter is sort of iffy, and it's going the other direction. I brought my camera just in case people didn't know. I mean, there are now people that aren't. This is this camera, which is more or less what I was using. Yet we were in New York visiting friends the other day, and one of my rolls of film fell out. I mean, it didn't unroll, but it fell. And this 10-year-old said, "What's that?" I was like, "That would be called film." So there is a kind of a way in which this technology, it's obviously changed. So how does that affect things?
But it is a camera also that allows you to, people don't always notice that the picture's being taken until after the fact.
Well, it's very quiet, and but so are cell phones now. So, but at the time, I always assumed I was being inconspicuous, but I'm not sure. Maybe, it's hard to say.
Did you, and there's some landmarks that are, you were talking before we started talking up here about just visiting the city again and kind of sensing the layers of places that you had photographed before. Like, what does that feel like to see those places anew now?
Well, I spent a lot of time with the negatives. Initially, I made prints, and I put those away for about 30 years, and then they came up with scanners, and so I was like, well, okay, now I can revisit all my negatives, which is a blessing and a curse. And so I started scanning everything, and then I started really being in New York in the 1980s, and then now this is like 2015. And in my mind, when I would come to New York, I would be startled that it didn't look like my photographs anymore. I was like, wait a minute, guys, what happened here? Very transformed. And then I've noticed even just today, we were walking around Chelsea and I saw a wall and I said, oh yeah, I took a picture of a guy on the ladder there, and I took a picture of somebody with their, these are current because I'm still doing it. So, and I could walk past places. I went into the place a couple years ago where the man was dunking his sandwich and his coffee, and I was kind of going to get a cup of coffee at a Starbucks, and I'm kind of looking around and I'm going, that's the same place. Yeah, so that was kind of surreal kind of experience, but cities change, and I think the main thing for me that I noticed was, the plethora of chain stores, that have sort of taken some of the individual quality of all cities and homogenized them, so it's kind of difficult to differentiate, like, where am I? I mean, in New York, but,
Right.
there is a kind of a...
Well, but it's sort of reassuring to know that there's some kind of like spiritual underpinning like below the like dead souls of some of these spaces, at least that you're able to feel that sort of resonating still. And obviously, there's just like some beautiful ones like the Carmet Bridge. There's and I think for a lot of people I know are responding, certain people, especially people who may have grown up in New York or had a longer relationship or were here when were living here when they were here, with the Twin Towers. I came here after that, so I don't have that relationship. And I think you have your own feeling about what those towers mean, which may be close to how I feel about them. But they're there.
And the towers played a big part for me because I was so, in San Francisco you've got the bay and you've got the ocean, so you kind of know where you are all the time.
Yeah.
And so here it was like, well, I have the towers, I can sort of sense my geography, they were my visual landmark. I could, I'm supposed to go to the left because the towers are there and not over there, right? And I mean, I'm not good at directions, even with Google, so. The point being that they were these landmarks, and I was always, kind of troubled by them because they were sort of the pinnacles of commerce in a way that I was at that point really questioning, as I think not uncommon. And so I had kind of a love-hate relationship. They were my anchor, but they were also representative of a whole economic capitalist structure that question. So that they kind of appear in this kind of shadowy way in the photographs. And I thought it was just really important to include them as markers at that time because, they were everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly markers. There's some things that I think feel a little bit timeless in a way. I mean, certain clothes obviously feel dated in some ways, but some come and go, and some things are very timeless in the pictures. Cars, things like that. You did choose to include a photograph of these posters of around Ronald Reagan and ACT UP, which was happening at that time.
It's interesting how when I thought, okay, I'm going to somehow put together a book as a Californian about New York, which already seemed to have a lot of hubris to that, it seemed full. And people would say to me like, or I looked up to see what did New York look like in the 80s, what do other people think? And they were like, well, it was Studio 54, it was Donald Trump, it was punks, it was like this incredible, nightlife and really kind of seditious and I've never been super connected to popular culture, but when I was looking, I go, yeah, I remember all that. But I didn't have any of that in my imagery. It wasn't what I was looking for here at all. And so, I think I knew that in San Francisco. I was photographing it there. But Ronald Reagan loomed large in my mind. And the issue around AIDS was clearly quite present being from San Francisco. So that was a real gift, that photograph, to be able to, you know, put that in and to pay homage to that really challenging time, you know, of the ACT UP period where Ronald Reagan hadn't been able to say the word AIDS until like 1987, you know. Many people had already passed, and he was still dragging his feet, and so there was a real anger around that, and so that became a kind of a touchstone for me.
Yeah, I think it really stands out, and it's important in a place where you're not choosing to let this be a book that's dominated by certain markers, but the ones that are there, I feel like are very well placed and help tell a certain story.
Right. I think if you look at Public Matters, you'll see, you know, a lot more because,
exactly.
you know, I was there on a more of I was showing up to the various marches and the social justice marches, and then I was weaving that in with the Latin community that I was living, and just showing sort of the contemporary stance of the immigrant population and vis-a-vis the war in Central America and what it looked like on the streets of San Francisco. So I had a better handle on it. But New York, when I came to New York during that time, I remember being like, wow, no one knows where Nicaragua is here, and that's all we were talking about in San Francisco. You know, there was maybe one or two FSLN, you know, spray painted someplace, you know, and I just was like, wow, that just shows you can, you know, from coming back, what a small town San Francisco is, you know, we're like kind of okay, this is what's happening, you know, we have, you know, Haight-Ashbury, or we have the beatniks, and then we have the whole city, it feels like hippies, and the whole city is like the gay community. You know, each one is like a wave that comes through, you know, the Nicaraguan issues, or now it's tech, right? So, but New York, it just absorbs all of it. You know, the scale that you're operating, you have multiple things happening, and you know, it's a lot to take in. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, like you said, being a part of, you know, when you're documenting, and more not documenting, but photographing and somewhat documenting the changes in a place that you're a part of, actively living in all the time. It's a very different relationship. But yeah, I do like thinking about these two works as this kind of dual consciousness that you were able to inhabit during that time.
Yeah, New York was sort of my reprieve, you know, where I could just photograph for the sake of photographing without that big agenda around it. But to go public with these pictures, so to speak. I mean, when I first brought them to New York, probably in the late 80s, people were kind of didn't have much interest in it. They go, you're not from here. You know, you really shouldn't be doing this. It was kind of, okay, take them home. And kind of put them, you know, on the shelf. And so it's been kind of thank you, everybody, that I could come back. And I could say, look how you look. You know, it was pretty great, you know, to be able to see this work all the way through and to be able to have this chance to give it back to the community.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think sometimes certain photographs are sort of waiting for their time, you know, to
yeah, no, patina.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. And maybe people just were too laser focused to be able to see them then. But I could see that there being a certain amount of judgment from New York.
Well, funnily enough, I don't know where that came from.
But no, it's wonderful. I think they have this certain aliveness that they're awaiting. What inspired you to bring them out now? Like, how did you kind of go about maybe some of the other choices that you made in editing? Like, how did you kind of choose to limit it to this particular group? Were there things that were there any that like you were sort of leaving on the cutting board that you were sort of undecided about, or that?
Well, editing is a huge part of photography, right?
Yeah.
And you'd be like, if you shot a film and you just showed everything, you know, you'd be like, whoa, what's up with that? But in this case, like I said before, I didn't have a lot of work. I really only shot maybe one picture of each thing, because it would be gone, right? And I would always be worried about how much film I had. And so there was a kind of a limited group of choices. And so I confess I scoured those contact sheets. And there are probably maybe 20 or 30 that didn't make the final cut of the ones that I thought were like possible. So it's a tight edit of a very small group of pictures in a way, I think.
Makes them extra rare.
There's not like a deep archive of pictures that have not yet been discovered like we like to think of happening. I think I got them all.
No, I think that makes them even more special. Just this really small bite that like needed to.
So many things happen. Like in my mind, first I like to think I'm sort of bilingual because I lived before the internet, and I remember times when you weren't inundated with information and you kind of only had what you could find right in front of you. It seems like the literal dark ages, but. There was a moment when early on the work came out somehow online. I think it was in the New York Times in the Metropolitan section, and it was also online. And then it said, as they wanted you to keep looking at things, and you go, well, so similar things are, look here, and I thought, well, who else was doing something? And so I started clicking away, and I really kind of had this I was a little worried. I was like, somebody else. But in fact, there are these different kinds of photography, these different ways in which images are rendered, and a lot of the images, for example, in retro New York or New York before the 1990s, which I'm inundated with because I like them, and I still do. But they're not the same in the sense that they're representations of not oftentimes a specific moment, but just a kind of a survey that this happened. Without kind of the shaking that happens when you take it to the next level. And when I edited, that's what I was looking for in the photographs, that way in which a whole story comes together in one frame, and there's a kind of succinctness to it, as opposed to there it exists. And there's a lot of images out there that are just like, we're inundated with representation, as opposed to narrative structure.
Right. You don't get the sense of, this man making a painting on the streets of New York. You don't get that sense of their relationship to the city.
Mm-hmm.
Even the guy splayed across the car, it's really this deep interaction with the city, and then you're interacting with their fleeting reactions.
Right.
I don't know if other people have questions for Janet. We can certainly answer those. I may jump back in with one of mine too, but if there are some things that I haven't gotten to, or maybe we circled around to, or just things that you have if you'd like to ask.
I can pass the mic over.
Sure.
Thank you. I was just curious about the format of the book and choosing the particular size of the print on the page and the size of the book and all of that relative to the content, which if you have a copy at home, it's really beautiful.
Oh, thank you. It's a good question. It's interesting how photo books have really kind of taken such a front row place now in our understanding of photography. I think we've, just to elaborate on the question a bit, in that I think most photographers work in sequences and think about projects and develop ideas in some way that is sort of like a slow movie of sorts. You're sort of pacing it and but yet it's kind of abstract the way a poem might be. And so the idea of a book in which you can hold all those images together and sequence them and create the size and create the quality of the exterior and the cover, it's all, informs the content of the book, right? It could have been really big, and it could have been, soft cover and kind of printed out to the edge, and you could have been just flying through these sort of massive pictures, but that didn't fit the content, right? So those decisions were made in concert with Morgan Crawford Brown at MAC, who's a designer, and she's just amazing how many books, and she's just like their main designer, and she oversees people at this point. But I think there's a kind of intimacy that the pictures are asking for that makes the book work well as that in that size. I think in my mind, early on, I kind of pictured it bigger, should be big. But then, when I started to think about it, I wouldn't say that I always thought it would be that size. And also, at some point, the pictures were actually smaller on the print, and I'm going, no, I don't think so, guys, it was a little bigger, right? So, you go back and forth, a half a quarter inch, on this stuff, centimeters rather. And but it all really is the fine tuning of the language that you want that book to speak. And so when the gold embossing really kind of set it off, and they kind of won me over with that, because I like being gold embossed, it's pretty cool. And then they had a really, frankly, more rich, dark, beautiful tone that I think that looks more like the actual book. But for a while, when they first sent it out, to me it was going to be this even more beautiful color, but it was paper. And I was like, I kind of want it to be cloth. If you're going to make it small and you're going to put gold on it, let's have it be cloth. Because I think the tactile nature of a book is really important, and what kind of paper it is, and what kind of gloss on the paper, the picture area, all those things. Like when you go back out into the bookstore and you go into the photo section, you just, each one of them, it's like they're holding a little movie in your hands, and you're able to sort of sense all those kinds of decisions, or a piece of sculpture in your hands, because there is this three-dimensional quality that you don't get. I mean, you go into galleries and how big is the image, what's the frame like, and how many on the wall, is it all a whole bunch of them crowded, or have we got like just one image to meditate on? So oftentimes we are just I think it's important not to just allow the online representation of work to be the only way you experience it. And especially when you're going like this, sort of like, oh, I saw those pictures, right? Somewhere in there, they're just flying by. So I think that it does a disservice to them, although I'm glad to see so much, because, well, sometimes.
Material.
Yeah. So that was, please, long question.
Yeah.
Long answer, I should say.
Janet, I have a question you might not know the answer, but I'm just curious how your pictures would be different if you were living here.
Okay, that's a question that I can almost answer. I always wanted to live here, but if anybody remembers the 70s, you'll see why I maybe didn't. I came and I looked around and I thought maybe, but it was rugged, man, on a level that hopefully only a handful of us can recall. But I decided I could do even more photographic work if I stayed here for a while. So I signed up for a class at ICP to learn how to do Photoshop because it was like a new language and I was completely, struggling with it. So I thought, oh, great, I will live here, I'll take the class and I'll photograph. And within a couple of days, the impossibility of being able to think the way I was thinking and also get to a class. I couldn't do it. I mean, almost no pictures during that period of time because I was so trying to navigate daily life, and instantly the anxiety and just the dailiness and having to show up and be someplace just zapped me of all of that kind of meditative, open-ended, free visual space that I had. So yeah, I don't think so, but many people do. Many people do, and I love, there's so many great books done by New Yorkers of New York City, and I'm always very impressed.
Hey, Janet. I have a question for you around the process. So as a creative whose work has received a lot of accolades and continues to thrive, one, do you experience imposter syndrome? And if so, what are some things that you do to combat that?
Brilliant question, and the answer is definitely yes. And it's a little, you'd think by now, right? But no, I think that it is a foundational level to my life that I'm always sure just not quite good enough. Yeah, now if I just worked a little harder, maybe I could sort of, get to whatever that next thing was. which really brings me to the idea that there is some kind of elusive next thing, which would be better to get rid of the next thing than to try to get better at it. Does that make sense? Like, what I'm trying to say here might be better said by the fact that if I could just stop having a desire for more, I might not feel so insufficient to the task. Yeah, so what are the things I do to combat that feeling of being an imposter? Okay, I read my resume, no. Which I did do when I had small children and I couldn't get anything done. I did get it out one day, and I said, oh look, you did do other things. I think that it is trying to get back to doing the art, that is really where the fountain is, that I can sustain myself by just continuing to make things. Because if I'm not making anything, I get really cranky. And just making a career is kind of rewarding, but not rewarding enough. So I think making the artwork is always sustaining my forward motion. So, I'm hoping to get rid of that. But I know many people who are farther up the quote-unquote food chain who still feel it. Definitely.
Hey Janet, can you tell us about your process of choosing the cover image?
Okay, the cover image, sometimes things come easily, and I would say this cover image came very easily. I think that if the South of Market book on the back cover has a picture of a mural being painted that looks like the city, and there's that guy with headphones from the 80s, and he's got a little kid next to him, and they're working away on a mural. And so I really loved the fact that this idea gets repeated here, and also the fact that he's making an image of the city, just like I was trying to do. But as was pointed out in that review in the Washington Post, and I don't think I'd thought about it until I read that review, his idea of the city was kind of idealized, because he had sort of dropped out, this was what the reviewer decided to interpret, some of the more, he made it more romantic image, the light was definitely not the way the painting is. So I think it's because it was an artist's rendering of the city at the foundation of the book. And so putting that on the cover was, I thought, really appropriate. Putting the title and my name on the back, well, I was a little taken back by that. Those designers, right? But I had another friend who's a book designer, and he said, no, it's okay. And I said, okay, it's okay. So wait, where's my name? It's on the back. The current. Yes.
Janet, thank you for this wonderful presentation. And at some point, you said that since I'm carrying a camera in my hands, I might as well shoot the film,
Mm-hmm.
So here, I understand that you always have a camera in your hands when you come to New York City. What about at home in San Francisco? How do you choose when to have a camera and when not to?
Right, and I can say in all honesty that I sort of very intentionally decided not to photograph in my own area where I live. I live in Berkeley, which is across from San Francisco, because I wanted to know I could just be and I didn't have to worry about that picture that I missed or what have you. And so I had focused for the last 10 years or so on photographing in San Francisco. And I would always bring my camera no matter what, whenever I went, because I never knew if something was going to happen. And sometimes I would just pull over and do it, and sometimes I would go with a very specific intention of photographing a building that's being broken, being built, or I would make appointments with people to photograph inside their offices or inside their homes. And so those were much more traditional kind of, I'm going out and making these images now, and I bring my camera. And then other days I would just go out and wander in areas that I wanted to document and pick up, the feeling of what was going on in a particular neighborhood. So I would sort of carve out time from my daily life it's very difficult to do both things at once, I think is what this is coming down to. So, you know, when I'm here, I am trying to see artwork in galleries and visit friends. And so I'm kind of squeezing in photographs around that. But those pictures are sort of coming to me as I'm moving through space. I have actually a huge collection of pictures from big cities all over the world that no one's ever seen, made with my rolling, because I decided that I would have on my family trips to places I wanted to photograph. So we've been, you know, to China and India, and you know, I'm fortunate that I was able to navigate these crazy trips to, you know, Madrid and what have you, but I just sort of knew I wanted to photograph in these other places, and so my family has been very tolerant of the fact that I try to get them to walk behind me so they're not in all my pictures.
So you're not entirely as free as you were in New York in those
Right, now I
places.
have this kind of group of people that I have to navigate. On our honeymoon, it was the first time I traveled in Central America with anybody else, because I'd done a lot of traveling and photographing, and then, yeah, I brought my husband, it was a honeymoon. And I realized right away that he was sort of a big white guy. I was like, no, that's not working in the pictures. So, yeah, so we've had to make some adjustments, but I just find that making pictures when I'm moving through a new place is like, I don't know, I find it really meditative and exhilarating at the same time.
Well, I think this is such a, sorry. Like you said, I do think this is such a lovely object, but it does kind of is a testament to the fact of like what a portal that this time was for that. You know, it's just like a small container of this like very liberated sense, and it does. It feels like a lovely album, you know, just with the embossing, and I think that feeling comes through. I also think the size of the photos with the person that asked that is really perfect, just for that really kind of intimate relationship that to me duplicates the feeling that you must have had when making a lot of these pictures. I think it allows us to kind of have that sensation that we're having that.
Yeah, I think using the word album, it really resonates for me. Trying to imagine a moment in time in the past, you know, I always am trying to, you know, I spend a lot of time looking at historical imagery, and, you know, Adjay and Bernice Abbott and Dorothea Lange, I just poured over these images to try to create what the small towns or what the city looked like through photography. And so when I did the Public Matters and South Market, both of those, I did say I feel like these are albums for San Francisco, you know, for the people who grew up there, and then for the people who are coming there now can look back to see what it was like. My grandmother came from a sheep farm in Ellensburg, Washington in 1915 on a train by herself to New York City to study at Parsons with Mr. Parsons himself. And she kept a diary of every single day of her year here. And I have always just wanted to see, you know, what did she wear? What was the street like? You know, what was her experience? So that feeling of time travel, I think, is always on my mind, that, you know, historical records that allow us to take a measure of where we were as we move or hurtle into the future, kind of balance it out, and yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. I don't know, I feel like that's almost like a nice place to sort of end. But thank you so much for sharing
Thank you
these
for
with
being
us.
time.